So I'm delighted to be here today. My name is Andrew Elnazir, here on behalf of AtkinsRéalis, and I'm here with Pat from Bruce Power. Delighted to be here for our fireside chat to discuss nuclear power and the future of nuclear power here in Canada. Just for folks, by way of context before we get to our questions, just wanted to share a little bit of context. Here in Canada, our population is reaching 40 million. The engineer in me couldn't help himself, so I actually checked. It's 38,901,274 as of yesterday. So we're certainly approaching the numbers. We're seeing rising energy demand, a lot of electrification demands. And so with that, it necessitates the need for reliable grids that are safe and carbon emission free. And so it's really important, a lot of what Bruce Power does, the operators, ourselves as the OEMs, to help contribute to the strength of the electricity grid and the future of nuclear power here in Canada. Just by way of, in terms of questions, I've been told to just share with you all that there is an app, the P3 2023 app sponsored by TIPSA that you can use to ask questions. And with that, we'll just highlight a little bit about Bruce Power. So Bruce Power is the largest utility in North America, operating 8 units, 8 nuclear reactor can-do units, and the largest and most successful P3 here in Canada. So a great success story that we'd like to share with you all and just to talk through. So with that, Pat, I'll jump right to the first question.
Great.
So knowing Bruce Power operates the largest nuclear power plant in North America, can you tell us a bit about the operations that you currently have and specifically highlight as well the refurbishment project that you're working on?
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew, and delighted to be here today. So Bruce Power, we are as Andrew mentioned, one of the largest nuclear operating facilities in the world. And we're located right over on the shores of Lake Huron, just about 3 hours northwest of the city here. So what we do is produce about a third of Ontario's electricity from the one site. As a private company, we've been operating the site since 2001. And really, we were formed to bring new life to the facility back at that time. Bruce A, which represents the older of the 2 stations at Bruce, had been shut down in the 90s. And more or less the electricity that had been produced at Bruce A was produced by coal. And a decision was made to bring nuclear back up, phase out coal, and that's really where Bruce Power as an entity came from. So over the course of 2001 to 2014, we refurbished units 1 and 2, and brought units 3 and 4 over at Bruce A back online. Our announcement back in 2015 locked in the life extension of the rest of the facility so that we can continue operating out to 2064 and beyond. And that's what we call our life extension program. And it's like bringing brand new megawatts back onto the grid, because at this time, if we hadn't been doing this life extension work, we'd actually be shutting down a number of our units over at Bruce A and Bruce B. So really important work in terms of contributing to the electricity system in Ontario, and certainly something we're very focused on right now as we move through our refurbishment units.
Yeah, it's very true. And nuclear energy in general is becoming a real focal point in a lot of talks today. 2 key focus areas are energy security and net zero, and we're seeing that across several energy ministers and ministries around the world. And so I just want to ask you, sort of, why is it the focus nowadays that we're hearing a lot about the importance of nuclear energy across the globe?
Yeah, great question. And it is being talked about all over the place. And I'm proud to say that Ontario was really a leader in this space. I like to tell a story of when I first moved to Toronto in the early 2000s. I'm originally from Montreal, and I'm a Habs fan. I hope there's a few Habs fans in the room. But I tend not to get too much love from the Toronto crowd when I say that, so apologies. But originally from Montreal, moved to Toronto, And I will never forget, sitting out on a patio in the summertime one day and looking up at the sky, and there was just this weird orange haze in the sky. And every day that summer, it seemed like there was this orange haze. There were no blue sky days. There were no hot sunny days. It was always a weird haze. And the facts are that in 2005, in Toronto, in Ontario, we hit a peak of 55 smog days. 55 smog days. That was the whole summer, basically. And you could see it from the distance on the horizon, but you could see it living in the city. And I'd never experienced it before, and I hope I never have to experience it again. But that was because of all the emissions coming from our electricity sector. I alluded to it before, it was a problem. We were emitting a lot of particulate into the air, a lot of greenhouse gas emissions into the air. All parties provincially made a conscious decision to phase off of coal in our electricity system. And by 2014, we burned our last piece of coal to produce electricity in the province, 2014. Since that day, there has not been a single smog day in Toronto. We had issues with forest fires this summer, and we saw a little bit of the return of that haze that we'd seen back in the 2000s, the early 2000s. But the smog days and burning coal is no longer a thing here in Ontario. And now, as the rest of the world looks to find ways to decarbonize, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and they're talking about phasing off coal themselves and phasing off of more of the fossil fuels, we've led the way in terms of making that happen. In Ontario, we are one of the few jurisdictions that have taken the lead in removing coal from our electricity system. And that has eliminated smog days. It's helped drive our economy by producing new clean electricity with things like the refurbishment program in Ontario. And ultimately, it's been a success. And now, as the world looks at doing this on a broader scale, we are the example. You couldn't have phased out coal in Ontario without electricity from nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, just our site alone, produced 70% of the incremental electricity needed to phase out coal. The rest came from the other nuclear stations over on the shores of Lake Ontario at Pickering and at Darlington. So nuclear has proven to do the heavy lifting in terms of phasing out coal. It's an example to the world and something that we should continue to be proud of. And I know we're now leading the way globally as people look to Ontario and what we've done, the decisions we've made here to support nuclear. And I know talking nuclear, most people when they turn on the light switch, they don't actually care where their electricity is from. They just want the lights to come on. They want their electricity bills to not be soaring. And that's the priority. But at the end of the day, we also know that having a clean electricity system is a competitive advantage. We can attract businesses because we know, or they know, that when they plug into Ontario's clean electricity grid, they're effectively decarbonizing their own business. It's a huge competitive advantage we have, and one that is now getting more traction and more people are talking about the technologies. Where does the electricity come from? And as that discussion around nuclear has broadened and people are talking about it, we hear a lot about the different technologies, CANDO. We hear about SMRs. We hear about next generation technologies. Andrew, maybe you can speak a little bit as a nuclear services provider, as a technology owner, a little bit about some of the nuances on technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So really there's a distinction by the name. So SMR, small modular reactors, are smaller in size than the larger scale reactors. Large reactors typically range between 700 megawatts to about 1,500 megawatts. Small modular reactors are about 300 megawatts in size. And so there are a lot of emerging small modular reactors. We do have a great degree of maturity of our own domestic CANDO reactors, our large reactors here in Canada, that we can all be proud to say are Canadian owned. So they're only one of 6 nations around the world that can say they design and manufacture reactors. And Canada is one of them. And ours is actually the most unique of all 6 in that we have a natural uranium as our fuel source. It's not enriched. Our reactors can produce cancer-fighting medical isotopes. They can be fueled and defueled online, so you don't have to take an outage to be able to refuel your reactors. So a lot of benefits in addition to the safety, the reliability. We've seen very strong performance at our Bruce station, but also Cernavodă in Romania, Wolsong in South Korea, Qinshan in China, OPG with Darlington and Pickering, a lot of strong, high-performing, reliable stations that are CANDU based. So it's been a proven technology for decades. I would say the SMR programs as well, there's definitely a place for them. We can't say just use large reactors because there are applications where SMRs make sense. If you have a lower density populace-wise, SMRs are a good fit. There are a lot of coal-fired plants that are producing 300 megawatts, and so an SMR would be a great fit without impacting your infrastructure, without impacting your transmission lines, your switch yards. So it's really a balance and an investment that's required on both fronts. We're seeing that very densely populated areas obviously require large reactors, but when you get into industrial applications in the mining sector, for example, an SMR makes sense to provide that kind of energy demand for their use. So I would say it's not a one-size-fits-all, but we have a lot to be proud of as Canadians in terms of the technology that we own. And in AtkinsRéalis, we're currently designing and advancing and innovating a lot of our existing technologies and working very closely with Bruce Power, OPG, to take it to the next level. And as an industry, we hear a lot from Saskatchewan that's looking to invest in nuclear. Alberta is another province that's looking to invest in nuclear. New Brunswick has a nuclear program and a CANDU reactor there in Pointe-le-Pro. And so we're seeing a lot of interest and uptake. And I do want to highlight, Canada as a federal government has invested 3 billion Canadian dollars to build 2 more units in Cernavodă 3 and 4 in the form of export credits. And so it's really giving Canadian suppliers a huge boost of energy to say, nuclear is the future for energy and electrification. And we have a solution here that's viable and it's proven to be able to meet that need. So definitely, I would say it's a balancing act in terms of the applications.
And Andrew, I mean, you mentioned something that I'm, obviously I'm always excited about, it's isotopes. And I just think it's worth expanding a little on this idea of isotopes, other than it being, the Simpsons baseball team. Isotopes are an essential part of our healthcare industry, and CANDU reactors happen to be just the ideal isotope making machine. We've been producing an isotope called cobalt-60 for decades, and it's used to basically, we have these adjuster rods, and we use them to balance out reactivity in our core. Every couple of years, when we do a maintenance outage, we can extract those adjuster rods, essentially break them up, and ship them around the world with our partners, Nordion out of Canada. The cobalt-60 is used to sterilize all kinds of stuff. Single-use medical devices, the primary usage, but it can also be used to sterilize food. It can sterilize insects to reduce the spread of disease. And more recently, it's been used in a treatment called the gamma knife. Mm-hmm. And if you can picture sort of a helmet with 200 individual beams, none of the individual beams do anything to the surrounding tissue, but where they meet at a focal point, they can act as this non-invasive knife and essentially cut out a brain tumor without having to cut into someone's head. Isotopes are also now used to actually to target cancer with particular molecules. So we brought online a new isotope production system last year. And again, it's leveraging the CANDU technology where you can actually access these vertical ports and shoot target material into the reactor and extract it a few days later. The target material becomes energized by absorbing neutrons, and it's used to fight cancer in a targeted way. So even after a cancer is metastasized and spread through a person's body, you can use what we call lutetium-177 to target the cancer cells throughout somebody's body and destroy them, eradicating them, without having to specifically pinpoint a place. It can be anywhere. And it's a targeted therapeutic, it's theranostics, and it's leveraging can-do nuclear technology and power reactors in a way that's never been done anywhere in the world to bring this amazing cancer treatment to people globally. And I know we're all very excited about the opportunities to further that fight against cancer using power reactors in Canada. Certainly a place that Canada and Ontario can punch above our weight.
As you can see, we tend to get really excited when we talk about nuclear power, but we're cognizant of the time, so we're just going to keep going here with the questions. But we're more than willing to take any questions from the audience as well after we go through ours. So Pat, Bruce Power is exploring potential expansion of its capacity, its nuclear capacity at the Bruce site. Walk us through sort of what the process is, where you are with that process, and what next steps look like for you.
Yeah, sure. So last year, the system operator, the electricity system operator, the IESO here in Ontario, released a report, which was basically a scenario that described what you would have to do to achieve net zero by 2050. I guess it's important to point out that this isn't a plan, this isn't a commitment, but it is a scenario that you would have to do to hit net zero. And it involved basically doubling the size of our electricity system and building a lot more of everything. That included a lot of nuclear. In fact, it recommended that to achieve net zero by 2050 in Ontario, you'd have to build 18 gigs of power, which is 3 more Bruce Powers. And again, we're the largest nuclear operating facility in the world. So it'd be a lot of new nuclear. The government put out a consultation and eventually developed a plan to start taking the next steps. And when people ask me this very question of, what is the plan for nuclear expansion? How are we going to get there? It seems daunting. 3 new Bruce Powers, that sounds like a lot. Which technology? Where do we put it? And I look to a quote from a movie I've seen countless times, over and over again. You might have heard of it. It was called Frozen 2. And in Frozen 2, Anna gets put into a situation where she doesn't know what to do, where she has to go next, what the plan is. And she sings this song that I've also heard many, many times. And it's about...
You want to sing it for the audience?
Well...
Break it down.
I'll take requests later.
I haven't seen the movie, so...
And she basically comes to the conclusion that she has to do the next right thing. So when you don't know what to do as a whole plan, do the next right thing. So what was announced in the Powering Ontario's Growth Plan, one of the items that was announced was, at our site, we are beginning the impact assessment phase, so sort of some of the regulatory steps you have to take to develop our site for a future permit, so we can create an option for Ontario. As we look at the nuclear landscape in Canada, there really is just one project going forward, and it's the SMR plan at Darlington. And why is that able to move forward? Well, it's because they did an EA about 15 years ago. So as our company and our province looks at doing the next right thing, developing more of these options and permitting and setting processes in motion to create options for the future is going to be essential to planning out our electricity system, and that's really what we're doing at our site. So we're doing the impact assessment for 4,800 megawatts of new nuclear. It's a technology agnostic process. We've issued an expression of interest to various technologies to look at what the pros and cons are and the options are for the future of Ontario's electricity system. This is something we're doing at our site, and it's something that can be replicated around Ontario and Canada going forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, back when we had the EA environmental assessment at Ontario Power Generation, I was there, and it was for large reactors. So it was even sized for larger than what they're currently putting there with the SMRs. But certainly it took a lot of effort, and I can appreciate the permitting process. When you're talking from site application right through to breaker on and the systems and the units are online, it'd be a 10-year process that you're going through. And so, I just want to touch on, what would you advise those that are new entrants or wanting to contribute to that life cycle? How early to start? Is there a part in the process where it's best to start? what are your thoughts from a permitting standpoint?
So from a permitting standpoint, when you look at what these options I was describing are, and we look at the potential for nuclear expansion around Ontario, the path of least resistance is certainly to start with existing facilities. As we often say, we probably have the most studied piece of property in all of Canada. We've been operating for several decades, and we've produced hundreds of environmental reports analyzing the impact and cumulative effects that we have on the environment, working with our communities, working with Indigenous communities to make sure there's partnerships and broad awareness of what it is we're doing. And ideally what we want to do as we work through this regulatory process, from our site's perspective anyway, is streamline the process, leverage the work that we've done, leverage the studies that we've done in the past, leverage the work that was done at Darlington that you were working on. Take all that experience and knowledge and leverage it to actually move forward with the permitting process at our site. We think that'll, there haven't been any nuclear projects that have gone through the impact assessment process. We think that starting with our site as a place that's well studied, well understood, with a bounding envelope similar to the one that was created at Darlington, is a way that'll pave the route for new nuclear as we look to expand it beyond our site, throughout Ontario and throughout Canada, ideally. And hopefully at some point, as leaders in this space and leaders in this technology, we're able to then export that to the rest of the world. I would say, as the discussion around, nuclear is ramped up, and as we kind of start to engage on this idea of a new 4,800 megawatts, and the regular media starts to pick up the story, people start talking, and the questions come up. They always do, and maybe I'll get your kind of take on this. What about safety of nuclear power plants, and what about the waste from nuclear power plants? What's your perspective on those two issues from the industry's perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm fortunate and humbled to have worked on both sides and have thickened my skin, so to speak, having worked sort of in the utility side with a lot of our plants, as well as now on the OEM side. Safety, I would say, runs in our DNA. I can't explain that any more than I can show you. If I'm spelling my first name, Andrew, I'd spell it phonetically to you. I'd say Alpha November Delta Romeo Echo Whiskey. And then some people say, yes, please. But it's essentially, human performance and event-free tools, and right through to our systems. Safety is integrated throughout everything we do in our business. And so, I never get a pizza order wrong because I'm using repeat back. I'm saying, what toppings I want. I ask them to repeat them back to me, and I confirm that they got the message across correctly. Sometimes the pizza's late. That might be deliberate on their part, but nevertheless, I've got a 100% success rate there. And so generally speaking, it's a bit of a fishbowl effect in that we have a very highly regulated industry. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the International Atomic Energy Agency, very, huge level of oversight in terms of what we do, every step of the fuel life cycle. And, when you talk about fuel, any fuel that we store in our pools, and so any used fuel that we have, spent fuel, stays in the station for a period of time before it's transferred over to dry fuel storage. Every single one is coded. And so, you can imagine if the IAEA comes in and asks, we want to inspect a specific fuel, we will have the barcode associated with that fuel and access it over thousands of fuel bundles. And so it's really important we respect the core. We have a healthy respect for the technology. We have a healthy respect for the industry. And we ourselves, as workers in the field, tend to exhibit a lot of those behaviors. Another example, just trivial examples for you, but to give you an indication, we touch on an event-free tool called three-point contact. So if you're walking down a flight of stairs, the expectation is you've got 3 points of contact, your 2 feet on the ground and a handrail perhaps, or if you're walking up a ladder. And that's to prevent slips and trips. It's to prevent different ergonomics or challenges that could injure an employee. And so a lot of that, I won't call it indoctrination, because you really do take it home with you. When you're mowing your lawn, you might look at, okay, what are some of the safety hazards associated with your blades picking up something from your lawn and flinging it somewhere across that could hurt somebody else, yourself, a pedestrian. So safety really is a part of who we are, and our industry is very adamant about reinforcing it. We learn from each other. So all our nuclear plants around the world, we all coexist. Any one event at a nuclear station impacts the rest of us. So we saw that in spades with Fukushima in Japan. So you'd think, Fukushima in Japan, it's not a can-do reactor, and it's it's the other end of the globe relative to us. And yet we had to perform modifications at our stations to say, you know what, we need to account for a potential Fukushima. Is there going to be a tsunami in Lake Ontario? No. Are our fault lines to the extent that you would see in Japan? No. We've measured them. But we do need to perform that due diligence. We do need to learn from our peers. And so we take a lot of lessons learned and apply them to our industry across the board. And so it's really important to reemphasize that through a lot of the work we do. In terms of I'll coin it as the waste. We typically, within Canada and across the industry, have to account for the waste life cycle. And so we have policies in Canada. We have an organization actually dedicated to the purpose of long-term storage. So Nuclear Waste Management Organization, NWMO, accounts for a lot of the planning for a deep geological repository, and several other countries are doing the same, to account for long-term waste storage. Having said that, we are looking at ways to minimize waste. And so looking at repurposing what traditionally is known as waste as a byproduct for fresh fuel for a new reactor. And so we've actually developed some new techniques, and we've tested them out in Qinshan at one of our CANDU stations, where we took spent fuel, used fuel, and put it into the reactor core in a configuration with other fuel such that it could be reusable. And so that helps minimize and close the loop a little bit. It's not to say that it's the end-all be-all that's going to eliminate waste, but it gives us a complementary solution with some of these other policies that are being put in place.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you keep the waste at the station for a period of time, 10 years.
Correct.
And it just made me think of our, we call it our secondary irradiated fuel bay. And in that fuel bay, you can see 10 years of waste. It's all just in one big pool, basically, where it's kept completely safe. But you can see it. It's much smaller than this room. Like it's just in a small space. It's all very manageable. As Andrew said, there's a plan. We're just executing the plan right now. But yeah, and I don't know, have you heard this analogy, like how much waste there is produced? Like it's basically—
Pop can?
Yeah, pop can, exactly. If you got all of your electricity in your lifetime from nuclear power, the waste associated with it could fit into a pop can, right? No other technology can make that claim. That's why it's so manageable, because it's so little. It's so energy dense that we are able to capture all of it on one site. We have a plan to manage it essentially forever. And the best part is we've already paid for the cost for all of that as well. People think that waste is really the Achilles heel of the nuclear industry. I would say it's one of our best attributes.
Yeah, and something that we have a solution for and we manage well. So it's definitely not a waste problem, so to speak, anymore. Great. So we're going to stop talking technical because we're at a P3 conference. So let's switch gears a little bit. As one of the more successful P3 stories here in Canada, Bruce Power being one of the largest, if not the largest, I would say, P3. Can you tell us how the P3 structure has worked for you, both the successes as well as the challenges, and highlight a bit on the green bonds that were 6 times oversubscribed, and just give us a bit of a sense of how we can leverage future P3s of this kind.
Yeah, absolutely the right thing to be talking about at this conference, I suppose. We're very proud of the way we have structured our deal with the province of Ontario. It obviously is attracting, so background on Bruce Power, we are owned by TC Energy and OMERS, as well as the 2 unions that work as regular employees at our site, as well as the broader employee network who have a small ownership in the company as well. And through a contractual arrangement with the province, we essentially invest in the life extension program and the operating of our facility out to the mid-2060s. So what this has done has created a de-risking for the ratepayer in Ontario of the refurbishment life extension project. As we move through each of the 6 units that we have to refurbish, we essentially put together a bounding case for the cost and time of our refurbishments of each of the units, what we call our major component replacements. And we lock those in ahead of starting any of the individual projects. As we move through the project at that point, the risk to deliver on time and on budget is ours. It's not the ratepayer in Ontario. It's not the taxpayer in Ontario. It's the private sector. At the end of the day, what this has done is attracted the capital with a long-term investment horizon, with a known rate of return, and with ongoing success of what we're doing, we're able to demonstrate that you can do mega projects, mega nuclear projects on time and on budget. And that's what we've seen with the return to service of our first, which was Unit 6. We actually just celebrated the return to service of Unit 6. It came back, even with the challenges of COVID, we managed to return our unit a couple of months ahead of time and under budget. So, one of the slams against the industry is always, well, you guys can't do projects on time, no way you can do them on budget. We're proving that completely wrong. We're able to leverage the rest of the private sector in our supply chain through long-term contracting arrangements with them to make sure that we have the equipment and the tools needed to move forward with these life extension programs. And even, as I said, even through COVID, we had a domestic supply chain that was able to support the work that we were doing at site. As Andrew mentioned, recently, over the past couple of years, we were the first company to issue green bonds for nuclear projects, and we're very proud of that. There have been a few since, but it really does add to the benefits for investors in terms of Ontario's ratepayers, right? We're able to reduce the cost of capital. We're able to bring in and attract more investment, and this will pave the way for future nuclear projects in Canada and Ontario specifically, as we look to find ways to build out this key infrastructure. We know we need a lot of it. The Pathways to Decarbonization said that we have to double the system. We know we need a lot more nuclear. It can't all be on the backs of taxpayers. The private sector has to be involved. There's a lot of capital that they can invest. These are long-term infrastructure projects and ones that we know can benefit from more investment from the private sector. And speaking of, as part of that supply chain and part of our partnerships in terms of private investors, what's your perspective on the future of the private sector nuclear industry in Ontario and Canada?
So a lot of our partnerships for a lot of our projects, we're seeing, so we have different streams of work. We have refurbishments, obviously domestically, that we're working through with Bruce Power, with Ontario Power Generation. We've got our SMR project now as well that is underway at Darlington. And internationally, we're looking at refurbishments in Romania. We're looking at new build projects in Romania as well. Refurbishments or retubes in Qinshan, in Wolsong, different regions. Argentina, we completed a refurbishment there. And so there's a lot of work, and there are a lot of projects on the go, and we're looking at resourcing and creating a pipeline and capacity that can sustain a lot of these projects, some of which are overlapping in terms of their timelines. And so with a lot of these different commitments, we've had to be smarter in the way we execute projects. And so one of the things, and I think in Barry White's segment, I actually was expecting Barry White, the singer, but no, I think he passed away. But in general, I would say with a lot of the contracting models that we've explored, the lump sum turnkey model is broken. It doesn't work for us. It doesn't work for the owner, the contractor, suppliers. And so we've taken a much more collaborative approach to our projects. With our projects, we take an alliance model where there's a no blame notion that's applied across the board. We share in risk and reward. And so in the case of Darlington, for example, the SMR program, we have an alliance of 4 partners. So OPG is the owner, Aecon is the constructor, we, AtkinsRéalis, are the engineer, and GE Hitachi is the OEM of their technology, of the SMR, BWRX 300. And so with the 4 of us, there are 4 equal voices at the table. And so it creates, and our contracting strategy had to emulate that such that we could de-risk a lot of the work that we do, create a level of transparency where it's an open book policy. So we all had to share all our numbers, timelines, predecessors, successors, with a lot of the work that we're going to do to execute this project successfully. And at the end of the day, it's the success of the project that matters. So it's not the success of any one company. Any one company that's looking to their own success at the detriment of the project will affect themselves directly. And so with that contracting strategy, we've found it's been working really well in that program, as well as our refurbishments. So the Darlington refurbishment, the large reactors, we were in a joint venture with Aecon, and likewise for Bruce Power's refurbishments. They started off with a specific contracting model that was, I won't say less collaborative, but it was your traditional contracting model. And that evolved to a much more collaborative contracting model where Aecon and, at the time, SNC-Lavalin, now AtkinsRéalis, were joint at the hip. So we brought the constructor in early in the engineering phase and said, we want you to be a part of the engineering phase. We want you to contribute at the beginning of the project, not to take our engineering deliverables, pass them on to the constructor and say, find a way to make this work or to make this executable in the on time, on budget, with quality and safely. We brought them in to the forefront. So with a lot of these collaborative models, we're finding it's yielded predictability for our projects, de-risked a lot of our projects. Cash flow curves have been cash positive in a lot of cases. And so investors, when they come in, they look at that and they say, wow, you have a track record within the nuclear industry that traditionally hasn't had the brightest track record in execution. And we've proven it through the Bruce Power refurbishments, the OPG refurbishments, the SMR program now, and others that we're doing more broadly on an international scale. So I would say, to Barry's earlier points, it's definitely, there's a behavioral component that needs to be ingrained in the contract. So you can't just hope for the best. You have to actually plan for some of the mitigation strategies. We do speak very openly with each other, so we call a spade a spade. That yields a lot of healthy relationships in our partnerships. And so being upfront, being forthcoming, having a no-blame culture, and then instilling the right leadership to drive those next steps has brought us a lot of positive outcomes. So that's sort of the model that we'd push for going forward.
It's a big industry, but it's a small industry in a way. And we all succeed or fail together, right? So we have to make a win of this. And I think we're doing a good job. It's working well right now. And hopefully it's something that we look to expand and then
Looking for some wood.
Grow going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we've got about a few minutes left. Let's take, I see a question on the screen here. This is probably for you. So the question is from Jay. What reactor designs are Bruce Power considering for their potential new build, and what factors are the most important? Is the ACR 1000 under consideration?
It's a good question. So as I mentioned before, we are trying to go the route of being technology agnostic at this point. Why? because again, it represents optionality. I think when you were doing the EA at Darlington, you probably weren't picturing that you'd end up with a 300 megawatt SMR at Darlington. But look at the optionality it created, right? So if I could describe it, I think I did before, it's a 4,800 megawatt bounding envelope for new nuclear. So we'd look at various technologies, we'd sort of estimate the worst impact any of them would have on any environmental aspect, and then use that as the bounding envelope. A few weeks back, we did issue an expression of interest to any vendor globally who was interested in looking at being part of the future in Ontario. We've had quite a bit of interest in it. To say, if the question is, are we considering? We're absolutely considering any technology as an option. And when it comes to the factors that are most important, I think that comes down to what's the biggest benefit to Ontarians? What's the biggest benefit to Canadians? It doesn't come down to a question of just levelized cost of power. One of the things that doesn't get told enough is the broader economic benefit that life extension at Bruce Power has. We are some of the most affordable electricity in Ontario, even as we go through this program, this life extension work. We're still well below the average cost of power in the province, and we will be forever, essentially. And you get there because you have economies of scale, right? As we invest lots of money at the site, we also produce power for the next 5 decades or beyond. And again, it's a third of Ontario's electricity. That's how we manage to keep our costs down. But beyond that, there's a huge economic benefit, right? We've got hundreds of suppliers that support what we do, and then the sub-suppliers. In general, our industry employs directly and indirectly 76,000 people in Canada. There's a huge ripple effect in terms of GDP to the work we're doing. We have a made-in-Canada solution with what we're doing right now with the life extension work in terms of fighting climate change and making electricity. All the money, well, I shouldn't say all, 98% of the money that we spend on our life extension program stays in Canada. That is a part of the story. So when you look at the factors that are the most important, obviously we want something that's constructible, licensable, that we know we can build without putting ratepayers and taxpayers and our company at insurmountable risk. It's also something that will be a broader benefit to the economy and protect ratepayers in the province. So when it comes to the ACR 1000, I'm not great at the different technologies. Is that something that you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, well, not on behalf of Bruce Power, but it is a technology that we've worked through. I would say, a lot of what we're pushing now, different size reactors. So we do have our own CANDU AC 1000 that was recently announced at a nuclear industry event, a CANDU industry event, as a matter of fact, that we're putting out there, and we will be, on behalf of Canada, Team Canada, putting out a formal announcement at the World Nuclear Exhibition, on a global stage. So that's one, but there are other size reactors as well, like the ones at Bruce Power, and OPG has different sizes at Pickering and Darlington. I would say less emphasis necessarily on the ACR, but we've learned a lot from the ACR 1000 in terms of what are some of the benefits and uses from that technology that we can adopt to others. But we haven't necessarily coined a single product line, so to speak. So
keeping our options open.
Keeping the options open, yeah, exactly. Ultimately, I think the messaging for the group here is it's a thriving industry. It's a multi-year program when you're talking nuclear. And so with that, it gives you a lot more certainty in terms of, the future. A lot of, in terms of the supply chain and what we're spinning up here domestically within Canada, a very, very lucrative investment, huge ROI. Obviously, there's an initial investment that's required up front. It is capital intensive to start with, as with a lot of other projects, but we do have a lot more certainty. We do have a lot more operational experience now to be able to to bring that level of predictability going forward. So
We
with
have
that,
good policy certainty from all levels of
federal government,
government, who are backing
provincial
this.
government, our energy ministers at all levels. So having government support plus private sector investment, it's a huge win for us that we need to capitalize on.
De-risking the industry, reducing the cost of capital, attracting private sector investment, that's going to be the key. And it all comes from policy stability at those levels of government.
Excellent. With that, Pat, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to share the stage with you, and look forward to continued collaborating.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate the discussion.
Cheers.